It is a sweltering December morning somewhere in the South China Sea. Aboard the newest battleship of the Royal Navy, one of the radar operators smacks the malfunctioning instruments in frustration. Suddenly, a number of possible hostile aircraft appear on the screen. With no time to waste, the operator calls a nearby officer. A noisy alarm blasts out on the ship, ordering general quarters. The battle is about to begin. This video is sponsored by World of Warships. Have you ever dreamt of taking to the seas as the commander of your own navy? Well, now you can in World of Warships, a free-to-play naval warfare-themed online game available on PC. With top-notch graphics, multiple theaters of war, and dynamic weather systems, you will truly be immersed in what it is to engage in combat on the ocean, and even under it. As other than a massive selection of ships to choose from, there are so many ways to engage the enemy, either as a lone hunter on the waves or in a squad online with your friends. What resonated with us at the channel is the attention to historic detail the developers go to make your experience as authentic as possible. And it's free to play, so it's easy to just download and check it out. No PC? No problem. World of Warships is available on console too. Support our channel. Download World of Warships using the link in the description below. And not only will you be helping us, but if you register using the promo code BRAVO, you'll receive 500 doubloons, 1.5 million credits, 7 days premium access, and a free ship of your choice after 15 battles to tame the seas. It is the latter half of October 1941. After heated debates, two fast capital ships with a destroyer escort were bound to Singapore, the main British stronghold in the Far East. HMS Repulse, a dated but modernized battlecruiser, was to be accompanied by the newest battleship of the Royal Navy, HMS Prince of Wales, famous for playing a major role in the sinking of the even more famous German battleship Bismarck half a year earlier. The relocation of two capital ships to the Far East was meant to deter and intimidate Japanese ambitions in a time of growing political tension, which was highlighted by the nomination of bellicose General Hideki Tojo as new Prime Minister of Japan. On the second day of December, to the reception of cheering crowds, the naval squadron entered the port of Singapore. The event was widely covered by the local press and was used by British propaganda to underscore the might of the Royal Navy, to possibly tone down any warlike spirits in Japan. Unfortunately, as the week went on, British scout planes reported increased Japanese activity north of Singapore, proving that reinforcement of the Eastern Fleet was likely insufficient. At last, on the 8th of December, the Empire of Japan descended down the warpath. Mere hours after the surprise morning strike of the American base at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese bombers struck the unprepared city of Singapore in a late-night attack, killing dozens of civilians. Hours later, with the sun rising over the Lion City, the commander of the British Naval Squadron, Admiral Tom Phillips, sighed at the recent news, disappointed that the increased presence of the Royal Navy didn't dissuade the Japanese. Hearing of the enemy's amphibious assaults on Thailand and northern Malaya, he decided to act immediately, taking his ships to sea in a hope to disrupt the ongoing invasion. Shortly before sunset, the British force departed the port of Singapore, steaming through the night to avoid detection. As it was reported that the shortest route north was mined, the squadron kept the northeast course until dawn. The morning greeted the British with thick cloud cover, hiding the ships from the Japanese aerial reconnaissance. Admiral Phillips spurred on, maintaining radio silence to ensure his sortie remained undetected. This decision called for some extra caution, as Phillips's warships were then invisible to both the Japanese and British alike, including the Air Force squadron designated to cover Phillips's mission. As the fleet pushed north, getting closer to the Japanese air bases, the sortie was becoming increasingly risky. What's more, the British were slowly losing the advantage of surprise, as their task force was sighted by a patrolling submarine and by a Japanese seaplane when skies briefly cleared before dusk. Fortunately for Admiral Phillips, however, the cover of darkness and emerging blanket of low clouds helped his ships to vanish into the twilight. Soon, they changed course to further deceive the enemies. It was likely a weighty decision, as subsequently one of the British destroyers spotted the glow of a flare roughly 5 miles to the north. Admiral Phillips remained cautious and ordered to change course south, ready to abandon the mission. Curiously, the flare was dropped by one of the Japanese bombers about to mistakenly attack the flagship of a task force escorting Japanese transport vessels, so an unexpected clash in the darkness was narrowly avoided. On board the Prince of Wales, Admiral Phillips considered his chances. The element of surprise was lost. His ships were at increased risk of being attacked by enemy aircraft and submarines. Even though Phillips was known to underestimate the potential of the Japanese military, the game seemed not worth the candle, and he decided to cancel the mission. The squadron headed back to Singapore, but shortly before midnight, the abiding sound of the sea was interrupted by an urgent report from Phillips's chief of staff. Apparently, the enemy was landing in the area of Kuantan, a small port roughly halfway on the eastern coast of British Malaya. If true, it meant most of the Allied troops fighting to the north were at risk of being cut off. The original mission was cancelled, yet this news gave hope that the British squadron could still prove useful. Odds were quite favourable. Phillips correctly assumed he had deceived the Japanese scout planes, and, steaming at a good pace under the cover of night, they should be able to reach Kuantan by the next morning. After a brief discussion with his officers, Admiral Phillips decided to put the makeshift plan into action. The squadron took a new course and steamed towards the coast. On their route southwest, the British stumbled upon a Japanese tug which could have heralded enemy landings. As the task force approached the shore, the Prince of Wales catapulted off a seaplane to search the area of the supposed assault. But upon reaching the Malayan coast, the pilot reported no enemy in sight, puzzling Admiral Phillips. Yet as the Royal Navy squadron loitered around Kuantan, preparing to leave, the Japanese were in the midst of a frantic search for the enemy task force. Unbeknownst to the British, they were spotted last night by another Japanese submarine, and 3 air groups were sent into the estimated area where the enemy should be by late morning. For some time, everything seemed to go to plan for the Japanese, but upon reaching the indicated area, the bomber crews anxiously looked out for the ship's silhouettes and watched their fuel gauges slowly going down. They soon realized the British were not there. It was due to the fact that the Imperial Navy, based off the incomplete reports sent by the submarine, had sent the attack too far to the south, not taking the later British detour into account. Yet luckily for them, at 10:15, a reconnaissance aircraft radioed the enemy task force had been found. 20 minutes later, the Japanese bombers were picked up by the air search radar of the Prince of Wales, giving the British sailors enough time to man their posts. It's worth noting that much of the modern state-of-the-art equipment on the Prince of Wales suffered in the high humidity and worked erratically. Still, the radar systems allowed the British to be at action stations in the wake of the attack. Eventually, the first group of Mitsubishi G3M planes reached the area and instantly focused on the HMS Repulse, rightly assuming her thinner armor. Numerous relatively light 250-kilogram explosives splashed near the battlecruiser. One bomb exploded against the armored deck amidship, igniting a fire on board. The Repulse valiantly fought back, piercing a couple of Japanese aircraft. Soon, 2 other bomber squadrons, this time armed with torpedoes, approached the British capital ships. The first spread of projectiles was launched against the Repulse, but the 8th battlecruiser performed some skillful maneuvering, commanded by her captain, evading all the torpedoes. Slightly to the east, the radar-controlled anti-aircraft guns of the Prince of Wales hailed steel against the Japanese bombers, shooting down or damaging several planes. But this was not enough. The warship took a sharp turn to avoid projectiles, but alas, 1 or 2 torpedoes struck the stern portion of the vessel. The Prince of Wales shuddered before the first damage reports came in. Half of the electric power running the guns, lights, ventilation, and other machinery was gone. The battleship suffered from massive flooding, which caused an increasing list and decreased her speed by half. On board, the British officers were visibly stunned, while in the distance, the AA guns of the Repulse raged against another run of level bombers, which failed to put further harm on the battlecruiser. At last, the British guns went silent as the Japanese planes left the scene, giving some respite to the startled and beleaguered British sailors. The Repulse was mostly intact, save for one bomb hit, but the Prince of Wales, steaming sluggishly, was in much worse condition. The pride of the Royal Navy listed slovenly. Her speed and maneuverability considerably decreased, and many guns were out of commission. Curiously, despite the circumstances, Admiral Phillips still maintained radio silence. It was the captain of the Repulse who contacted Singapore requesting help from the Australian Air Force Squadron, awaiting the signal to take off. But long before Allied planes could reach the position of the naval squadron, the enemy struck again. It was a peculiar view for Japanese crews to see the lack of air cover for the enemy squadron, especially given the relatively short distance from Singapore. But this blunder obviously didn't stop them from launching another attack. The slowly moving Prince of Wales was then an easy target for the Japanese and sustained 3 or 4 more torpedo hits that caused more flooding, resulting in the battleship to settle deeper in the water. The Repulse, however, shone again, struggling against the odds. Competently steered by her captain, she dodged the first spread of torpedoes, while the anti-aircraft gunners shot down 2 of the attacking planes. Morale rose among the sailors, and many hoped for the ship's survival. But they quickly sobered, seeing more groups of approaching planes. The very next attack on the Repulse was more nuanced. The Japanese bombers struck from 2 sides simultaneously, and these torpedoes were impossible to avoid. 5 consecutive hits ripped at the sides of the Repulse, allowing thousands of tons of seawater to pour into a number of watertight compartments and causing her to list severely to the port. Both of the capital ships withstood critical damage, but then yet another squadron of level bombers approached the British vessels. The Japanese concentrated on the Prince of Wales, but even though she was barely moving, only 1 bomb reached the target. It was a singularly unlucky hit for the British, as the bomb penetrated the armored deck and blasted into the makeshift casualty station, resulting in the death of a few hundred men. After less than 90 minutes of Japanese air raid, both British warships were smoldering steel wrecks, symbolizing a bitter end of the battleship era. HMS Repulse soon capsized and sank, but the Prince of Wales was afloat for an hour longer, enough to see the arrival of the Australian Brewster Buffaloes that would have possibly changed the course of the battle if called earlier. In the end, the Sea of Kuantan became a graveyard for more than 800 British sailors. The sinking of the HMS Repulse and Prince of Wales was an incredible, if unexpected, victory for Japan. Never before had a capital ship been sunk at sea by enemy aircraft, let alone such a modern one. The 10th of December 1941 marked a turning point in naval history, as the decades of battleship dominance was coming to an abrupt end. The battle also signified the demise of British superiority in the Far East, which in turn contributed to the slow downfall of the once mighty British Empire.